right, so the other form that I started altering was the plate. And for this plate, it's going to be a breakfast or, a small dinner size plate. I start with 3.5 pounds of clay. And I want to get this clay nice and centered. All right, and the key with making plates is compression. So as I'm flattening this out, I'm compressing from the center out. So I want to make sure I come back in and compress from the outer edge into the center of the plate. And this just prevents all those nasty S-cracks from happening. Judge the depth. Looks pretty good. All right, now I'm just going to lift the rim. Pull this out slightly. Compress again. Okay, give it one more pull. There we go. Okay, and the last thing that I do, I want to get all this extra slip off the surface. So I'm going to take my metal rib and drag it across the top and lift all this slip off. I'm also compressing at the same time here. Then I want to get a lot of this kind of spiral that I've put in with the rib. I want to erase all that information. All right, there we go. So this is where I start with the plate. And now I want to define kind of the inner area of the plate. So I'm going to make a definite rim. And to do that, I take this rubber tip tool and I'm going to draw a kind of scalloped pattern on my plate. And I'm not worried right now too much about what this looks like, because I'm going to be dragging a tool alongside that pattern in a second. So then I take this little piece of aluminum flashing. You also could cut a metal rib into a shape that's, the most important part about this is to have kind of a squared off end with a 90-degree angle. And for it to be thin, this is no wider than 1 inch. And you'll see why when I start dragging this tool. So to kind of alter this plate form, I'm just going to take this piece of metal flashing and drag it. So I'm going to start where I made my line, and I'm going to drag out to the edge. So now that I've dragged my tool through the rim of the plate, I want to now alter the form just a little bit more, because the one thing that I don't like about the edge still is that it's still pretty round, and I want it to undulate a little bit more. So I'm just going to take my finger and I'm going to pinch and kind of pull every other one, and you'll see it start undulating a little bit. Okay, so now you can see the difference. It's definitely gone out of round a little. And the last thing I want to do now is to compress the rim, because everywhere that I've dragged the tool is a stress point on the clay, and it could possibly crack there. So to prevent that, I'm just going to compress with my sponge. And that's the plate. All right, so I wanted to show you guys a variation of the plate. So with this one, I started by making a scalloped area inside, and on this plate here, I chose to do a square. And on this plate, instead of dragging that tool, I'm going to use a stamp and stamp into the rim. All right, so just like the piece of flashing that I used to drag the first plate, I'm going to just start right on the edge of that square and stamp in. This plate has been sitting for I'd say about an hour, all the sheen is off of the plate. And when I say an hour, I mean in a dry environment. You kind of want it to get back to the consistency it was when you first made it or directly out of the bag. So this is just another way to alter the rim of a plate to give it a little bit more interest. And it also takes it just slightly out of round. And I have a whole bunch of stamps that I just make out of clay. This is a bisque stamp. So I'll make it out of the same porcelain I throw with, and then I'll bisque fire it. And this one looks like this. All right. And there's the plate with the stamped rim. This is a plate that I made earlier, and it's now leather hard, so it's ready to trim. One thing that I wanted to mention is when I drag that tool, so again, this tool here, to make this mark in the plate, it leaves a really sharp edge on all these raised areas. So at this stage, before I trim it, I just smooth that out. And simply by taking a sponge and dragging the sponge over those sharp points. And it's good to do this at the leather hard stage because it doesn't take much effort to get it smoothed out. If it was later on in the drying process, like say bone dry, it would take a little bit more effort to smooth them out. Not much, but just a little bit. And then when I trim my plates, I use a foam bat. And the foam that I use is a really thin foam. And it's enough to cushion the piece so that the rim won't get destroyed. But it's not so much that the piece will wobble. If you get foam that's too thick, sometimes, especially if you have taller pieces like bowl-shaped forms, the thick foam will wobble a little bit and it'll make it harder to trim. So I prefer the thin foam. Put this upside down, get it centered. So I always start by trimming the outside before the bottom. And I don't trim a very distinct foot ring. The goal with plates is trying to get them to be the same thickness, so the wall and the foot to be the same thickness throughout. All right, so I've got the side trimmed now, and I'm compressing this edge here just with my finger to soften it up. And now I'm going to trim out the inside or the bottom of the foot. I start by getting the width of my foot ring. So I'm defining that width of the foot ring, and then I'll just remove the excess clay from the middle. And because I throw my plates in a concave, like I throw them as a very shallow concave curve, I want to make sure that this, when I trim it, is a very shallow convex curve. So if you imagine this foot ring gone from the piece, that curve would continue from here out to this side and down. Got to remove just a little bit more right there. I'll compress this edge. So I'm just compressing all the really sharp edges because that's where pieces will chip later on in the process. Just make sure they're compressed so they're slightly rounded. And there's the trimmed plate.